opportunities for you. This afternoon, we're going to start off with Roman, who's going to be talking about redefining narratives. So I'm quite interested to understand where that will take us and what journey that will take us. So I'm going to hand you over.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for the humbling and warm introduction. How is everyone doing today? Yeah? Good, I love the energy. Cold, did you say? Yeah, I know, it's cold. You know, I was thinking of taking off my jacket, but no, we'll keep on. How was the food? Good? No meat? Good. Is it vegan option? Vegetarian option? It's good. I think sometimes, most of the time you go to places, there's always meat. I think sometimes it's good to have a bit of a variety, right? Cool, perfect. I haven't had a chance to have any yet, see if there's some left after. Before I speak, I try to make it a point of not eating. Just drink water before I speak. So, my name is Romain Mohammed. I am, like I said earlier, the founder of a company called Diversify. It is an agency / consultancy that aims to bridge the gap for marginalised and underrepresented communities in the professional world. I'm also a researcher at Birkbeck University, where I research into identity, belonging, race and ethnicity in post-war Britain. Today I'd like to speak to you about a topic that I've spent about 10 years researching, okay? A topic that I'm quite passionate about for a number of reasons, and a topic that I think we all ought to know more about, right? But before I start, I'd like us to all start by trying to overcome our ideas about history and really start to see history for what it is. So much of what we know about history, what we understand about history, isn't really bound up by evidence, but more in the emotion. We form emotional connections to people in history, to places in history, to narratives in history, and then and use our emotions to bind us to an idea about history, rather than using the evidence of that history to drive our narrative. And I think that's very, very, very problematic, and has been problematic in the way we perceive history and the type of history that is presented to us. So, what do I want to talk to you about today? I want to speak to you about redefining narratives, celebrating the history of black leadership in the UK. But whilst we celebrate the history of black leadership, we also need to celebrate the presence, or the black presence in the UK. And we're going to discuss that and speak about that and look at what the presence actually is. This picture here, before we start, is a picture of someone, what they call a Moor. Okay, has anyone heard of a Moor before? Yeah. So this picture is a picture of a Moor, and it's an early 16th century image. This image is a Danish image. However, it's currently in the museum in Cambridge called the Fitz Museum. Yeah, there's an exhibition called Black Atlantic. It's on until about January, so you can go down and see this image live in the flesh. Okay, so just thought I'd say that before we start. Right, but we're on a journey today, guys. We've got about 60 minutes together, so what I'd like us to do is try and be as interactive as possible. Okay, I might open the floor to you, I might ask you questions, I might want to know what you think, but I want the energy to be high. Yeah? I don't want us to be falling asleep, I want us to stay with each other for the next 60 minutes, because that's the best way for us to get through such a topic like this. This is not a topic that is light, it's a topic that is quite a lot of information, it's quite heavy, okay? But the best way for us to do it is do it together, okay?
Yes.
We're not I'm going to ask again, because we're not really off to a good start. The best way for us to do it is together. Yeah. Right, that's much better, guys. Much better. Alright, so what we're going to look at, this is the agenda for today. Now, essentially we're going to be covering about 10,000 years worth of history. However, I don't know if 60 minutes is enough to encapsulate 10,000 years of history. So we're going to do our best, and we're going to get through as much as we can get through, okay? Okay?
Yeah.
Alright, perfect. So, this concept, black and white. The concept of black and white or colour, these terms are colours of art. Okay? The colours of artwork. Something being black and something being white. It's a term of art. No one in this world is really and truly, in terms of pigmentation, this colour. No one in this world, in terms of pigmentation, is this colour. These terminologies were developed by people like John Frederick Blumenbach, Carl Linnaeus, and Francois Bernier, and other people in the 18th, 19th, and even 17th century. They were terms to denote power and privilege and subjugation over one over another. Okay? The terms black and white were established in by pseudo-scientific racial terms or pseudo-scientific racism. They have nothing to do with genetics. Okay, as I think we should really understand that there's not 4 races, as many of these pseudo-scientific racial scientists developed. There's not a yellow race or a red race and a black race and a white race. There's people who have differences in terms of eye color, hair color, skin color, but there's only one race. And that is the human race. Right. Okay, so I think before we start and we get into such a topic, I think we all need to have that in mind. Yes, there are differences, but there are more similarities from a DNA perspective between us than there are differences. Okay? So I think we need to really take that in mind. And we may choose to use these terms, or we may choose and restructure them and take them on in a new way, or we may choose to get rid of these terms altogether and call ourselves something else. I think what is important to note, though, is that these terminologies in the particular period of time that we're looking at weren't actually used. In the medieval and early modern period, these terms weren't used. People of colour, or black people in particular, people of African descent, were called a number of other things, but not really called black. They were called Garamantes, they were called Moors, they were called Blackamoors. Okay? They were called a number of other terminologies that we're going to see in a little bit more detail, but not black. And I think it's really important for us to understand this, because sometimes you may read something or come across something, whether it's in artwork or a historical textbook, and you might see a name or see a word and it might refer to someone, but because it doesn't have the terminology that we're used to and we understand, we might think that it's talking about someone completely different when it's not. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, perfect. So, this image here, when we see images like this around in history, these images are usually taken to define a specific period of time. Okay? So when you see King Henry VIII, he is usually put there as the definitive image of the Tudor period. Right? That's what you learn about in school. King Henry VIII, his wives, people that look like him, etc., etc. Queen Elizabeth I, same thing. Okay? But we know, when we start getting in this section, when we start talking about Queen Victoria I and Queen Elizabeth II, rest in peace, we know that these monarchs governed and ruled territories that were very, very, very diverse. They ruled over an empire in Queen Elizabeth I's days, mainly. Queen Victoria I's days, Queen Elizabeth II's days. They ruled over an empire that consisted of many, many, many different people. So why then should these images be taken as the definitive image of England, of Britain, when we know that it wasn't, in terms of diversity? Okay? So just as these images don't represent England in its definitive iconography, the definitive picture of what the actual people looked like, all of the people looked like, we shouldn't be naive to think that these images were any different. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a question of iconography. Iconography is very, very important. Okay? It looks at, we need to challenge the way we see ourselves, the way the world sees us. Very important. This is a very interesting quote, and it's a quote that was replicated or regurgitated by 3 people between a 1,000-year period, okay? The first person to say this was someone called Venerable Bede from 7th century. He was a monk, a very, very important person, okay, in England. Then we have Richard Cirencester in the 14th century and someone called Francis Bacon in the 17th century. They all said the original inhabitants of Britannia or Britain, whether indigenous or foreign, are like most other countries, unknown. So they're saying that contrary to popular belief, contrary to the status quo, contrary to what we think or an image that we're given, that they don't actually know who the indigenous inhabitants of this country are. In other words, it might not be them. Okay? One of the things about this lecture is it's called Redefining Narratives. But we've been given from school days, from whatever in terms of society, the history, the writing of history, we've been given one particular image of what England, Britain, looked like looked like until a particular period of time. And we're going to get into that particular period of time shortly. But what I want to do today is question whether that is actually factual, or was there something else going on? Did diversity start when we're told it started, or did it start much, 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 much earlier? And you may say, well, why is that important? Why does it matter? Well, it matters in a number of ways. Okay? And we'll look at why it matters in a number of ways shortly. But that's the kind of context that I want to start this presentation in, that we're trying to redefine narratives or look at a counter narrative to the one that we've been told about. Okay? I'm not here to preach. I'm not here to force you guys to believe me. But what I am here to do is to present something else. And you then can choose to believe or think about what you want to think about. It's almost like when you're on a diet, or when you've got a type of food. When you've got McDonald's and you've just given McDonald's, what do you eat? Just eat McDonald's, right? Yeah? But if you've got Subway, you've got some Chinese food, you've got Indian food, you've got different cuisines, then you have a choice of what to eat based on your preference. Same with this. If you're given just one type of history, for which so long we have been given, then that's the only type of history that we believe or we can know about. But if I'm here today saying, okay, that's what we know, that's what we've been told, but what about this? We then can choose to think about something or see it in a completely different type of way. Is everyone with me? Yes. Okay. So this quote, very important, very, very informative, and it then moves on to this, okay? So the lecture is called, or the presentation is called, Redefining Narratives. But to redefine a narrative, we have to know what that narrative is. So what is the narrative when it comes to black people in the UK, people of African descent in the UK, and people of colour in the UK? What is the narrative? What has it been? So the narrative has been twofold. The narrative has been twofold. Firstly, Windrush. Windrush from 1948 to 1971 is supposed to be the dawn, almost, of diversity in this country. It's set out as this monolithic instance, this monolithic event, when black people, people of African descent, are supposed to have come to this country in the majority. Okay? That's 1948 to 1971. My grandma came in 1961. She came from Jamaica in 1961. She was 17 years old when she came, and she's had a lot of challenges. I'm not sure we've got time to go through all of them, but she was a product of Windrush, okay? And that was something that she was told when she came to this country in 61, okay? And then the narrative, the second part of the narrative is that if black people were in the UK, before 1948, it was only through the myopia of automatic enslavement, which would be the measure of their status outside of the continent of Africa. It's a long statement, isn't it? I know. What it means is, okay, in simple terms, it means that black people in the UK came here in the main in 1948, and if they were here before 1948, it was only as slaves, or in some type of servile nature. What do you think that does to someone's psyche? If they're told constantly that their existence in our country is through the lenses of recent immigration, and if it was before that, it was only as a slave. It's not very motivating, is it? No. So I would like us to start questioning such rendering, because I think it's very problematic when we have these two narratives. And I'd like to offer us today a counter-narrative that shows that diversity in the UK started at a much earlier period. Okay? Perfect. Okay, so next slide. So, along with the narrative, these are some of the phrases that have been used to denote the presence of black people in the UK. So they've been described as the other, chance visitors, the stranger, isolated, strolling players, unlikely, accidental. I don't think anyone anywhere is accidental, unless you're Christopher Columbus. But that's a different story, okay? Automatic enslavement or transient, solitary, etc. So these are the terminologies that have been used to describe black people in the UK through the academic space, through historians, scholars, etc. These are the terms. Not very positive, are they? No. Okay. Some of the scholars and historians that have been very important in discussing this presence historically from 1947 are here. So you've got someone called Kenneth Little. In his book, Negroes in Britain, he doubts if the black man, whether of African or African or East Indian descent, was familiar in England until well on in the 16th century. Except, see, look at this chance visitor thing happening, except as a chance visitor or when imported from the Portuguese. So this slavery aspect happening here as well. You see that? Next, Peter Fryer, he has a book called Staying Power. And this book is a very, very good book for other reasons. I would suggest us to read it for other reasons. But he says, Africans in England were strolling players, isolated, strange and transient. That was in 1984. Kim Hall, again, in her book, Things of Darkness, she says that African is too accidental and solitary to be given a historical statistic. I'm going to read that again. Yeah, I know. I see some shocked faces. Wow. Kim Hall said in Things of Darkness, even the title is a bit strange, isn't it? The African is too accidental and solitary to be given a historical statistic. I'm just going to let us take 10 seconds to just think, let that marinate, let that start settling. Okay? How does that make you feel? Sad. It's rubbish. Yeah? Okay. Well, let's look at how it's rubbish and why it's rubbish. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. All right. So what do we know? What do we know? So Alfred J. Church, very interesting and important historian, in his book Early Britain in 1896 edition, he says that the island was inhabited probably at this particular time, so prehistoric Britain, not 1896, but in prehistoric Britain. He says that the island was inhabited by different races of people. He says men, which is a very, we know historical term, it's very sexist. Okay, but what he really means, he should have said that, but what he really means is men and women, people. But he used the term men, I know. Tacitus, who was a Roman general who came to the UK during the Roman period, he says that when he came here, he saw a few things, made a couple of observations. And I'm glad that he did, because if he didn't, maybe we wouldn't not be able to know what England actually, potentially was like. So he says he came to the UK with that Roman force, that Roman invasion, and he said that there was a group of people called the Silures, was an ethnicity, an ethnic group in the UK at the time. And he said that they had very dark complexions and for the most part curly hair. And he said that there was another group that had red hair and were tall of stature. I didn't say this. Some of you guys looking at me surprised. I didn't say it. Tacitus said it. So based on what we heard from the previous slide, this seems like contradicting type of information, doesn't it? Something else happening here. There's two narratives, two normatives. One that people of African descent were strolling players, strange, isolated, not really here, can't be given a historical statistic. And then we hear of people like Alfred J. Church, Tacitus, and there are others. There are other people who say a very, very similar thing. But based on time and the restrictions of the slide space, I couldn't put everybody. Okay? But there are other people. Samuel Lang, he was a very famous and important English MP. He wrote a book called Prehistoric Remains of Caithness. In the appendix, another very important anthropologist called Thomas Huxley had a section in it. And he basically said that in the UK, in England, in Britain, there was a race of people and they were very, very savage. Very, very savage, barbaric. And something happened to these people. There was some type of revolution, either from within or without. And that was able to civilize them. They became civilized. And they were able to start burying their dead in a civilized way, worshipping the gods in a civilized way, doing things that civilized people at the time would do. Okay? But he still had to say something about what they looked like. He said that they had more resemblance to the lowest Australian than to any other historical European race. This is his comments about who he calls the indigenous populations of England. They resembled the lowest Australian race. What does the lowest Australian race look like? I wonder. I don't know, but I wonder. So, what do we know about? We know about someone called Cheddar Man. I want to see from a show of hands, who has heard about Cheddar Man? So quite a lot of people, more on this side. This is the good side. How about this side? I remember in school when they used to have the sets. Who remembers in school when they had sets? The high set, low set. This side's high set, this side's low set. I'm only joking. We're all the same. No, we're not. Okay, so Cheddar Man was someone who was a very important person, and I would say this whole lecture is about redefining narrative, celebrating leadership. So I feel like we've started to look at the narrative part and have a redefinition of it to show that, okay, just because we're given a level of a part of information or one side of information, there might be something else that we could consider. Just to consider. Doesn't mean it's right. But history is about presenting counter narratives. Historians are always at war with each other. Not physical war, but academic war. Some will say something, some might write something in a book, another historian 2 weeks later will come out and refute it and say that's not true, that didn't happen, this happened. But that's how the discourse and the academic profession gets somewhere. That's how we move forward, by having conversations that we might not be comfortable with because they don't follow the normative structure and the direction that we've been given and that we've heard for all these years. But that's how we have progression, when we have these type of conversations and we hear this type of information. Does that make sense? Yeah. So Cheddar Man, we know that Cheddar Man lived around 10,000 years ago, and he's supposedly the oldest, almost complete skeleton of our race. So our united race, which is Homo sapiens. I know some of us don't always act like Homo sapiens, sometimes. I act like a Neanderthal sometimes, especially in the morning, before I've had my coffee. I'm not very civilized, okay? Road rage, you know. So he's supposed to be one of the oldest Homo sapiens ever found in Britain. He was found in 1903, but because of technology restraints at the time, we couldn't do any analysis of him. But in 2018, a group of scientists, University College of London scientists, UCL, Natural History Museum, DNA specialists, very, very important, smart, intellectual people. Way more than me. Way more. They done a reconstruction of him based on his DNA. And the results indicated that Cheddar Man had blue eyes, dark coloured curly hair, and dark to black skin pigmentation. Dr. Tom Booth, who was one of the researchers in charge of the analysis and the research, he said that whilst Cheddar Man is only one person, he could be, or he is, indicative of a wider population of these people, not just in Britain, but in Europe as a whole. Does that make sense? You know, sometimes there might be, when you look at infestations, right? You might see a mouse or a rat or an ant. You might just see one, but it's part of a wider group operating in a particular area. It's just that one has come into your house. Sometimes you might get more than one come into your house if there's food, etc., etc., etc. I'm not likening this to an infestation, but what I'm saying is in terms that we might understand. In terms of, just because we've seen one, it doesn't mean it's the only one. It's part of a wider population. And scientists and researchers have found that. There's someone called Labrena, another man called Labrana in Luxembourg, and other people in Spain, in Portugal, etc., who have the same DNA as Cheddar Man. It's interesting, isn't it? It's different, isn't it? Wow. He was supposed to be part of a group called the Western Hunter-Gatherers. And this group in Europe was supposed to have been pushed out by another group who were called the Early European Farmers. Right? And apparently, 10% on average of the population of Europe has traces of this DNA. Important, isn't it? Next slide. What else do we know? So has anyone heard of Septimus Severus before? No. What happened my high set side? It's not. Yeah. No. No, it disappointed me. Sorry guys. Sorry I judged you so early. So Septimus Severus is a Roman emperor, or was a Roman emperor, right? He was said to be, we don't know much about Septimus, but we know enough to know that he was said to have been from North Africa at the time. Said to be from Morocco or Libya, right? He was a Roman emperor, and he came to the UK and settled in York. And for the first time in history, the capital of the Roman emperor was in England, and was in York, to be specific. And the reason why I mention York is it has a lot of significance when it comes to the presence of black people in the UK. Okay? Now we're going to look at it shortly and see why York is so important. But this is what Septimus looks like. This is a picture of him and his wife and his two sons below. One you can't see because it's been scrubbed out, and they say that the other son rubbed out the image of the other son when they had their civil war about 20, 30 years after this image was made, okay? And he wanted to eradicate his very existence of his brother, so he rubbed it out. You know what siblings are like. I know. So, that's what Septimus Severus looked like. We can see that he's different to his wife and his children. There's a contrast in this image. And this image is said to have been one of the oldest images of a Roman emperor at this particular time. Remarkable, isn't it? Yes. So, next. Has anyone heard of the Iron Bangle Lady? No? Perfect. Again, this is an image. She was found in York. Again, this whole narrative of York happening in a Roman presence, people of African descent, in York, the capital. Starting to make a bit more sense now. So she was found in York. This is based on her DNA. This is a reconstruction of what she could have looked like. She's said to have been born in the UK, but been biracial, from mixed parentage. The African side is said to have been such. She's said to be half sub-Saharan African and half something else, but we don't know what. Okay? However, it's very interesting. What can we see at the bottom of the picture? Jewelries, what did you say? Craftsmanship. Yeah. I don't think if any of us died today, we'd be found with that in our graves. I wouldn't be, definitely. What this means, I know we might look at these images at the bottom and think, oh, it's just a little tiny bit of silver or some craftsmanship or some jewelries, etc., etc., etc. But in the Roman period in Britain, it was very different. The gap between rich and poor wasn't like it is now. They didn't have finance. They didn't have hire purchase and mortgages and things like this. If you didn't have it, you didn't have it. Okay? And it was just as, it was as black and white as that. If you didn't have it, you didn't have it, you couldn't afford it, you couldn't afford it. She, however, in recognition of the theme of Black History Month, saluting our sisters, that's why she's there, because she's a leader in her own right. But what she suggests and indicates is that she was a woman of colour, with high status, of very, very high status, to have these things found in her grave. She wasn't a slave, so that whole slavery narrative is gone out the window, and she wasn't during the period of Windrush because it was thousands of years before, so we don't need to think about that. But it means that she was from aristocratic class, high status, wealthy, etc., etc. It's interesting, isn't it? Okay, Beachy Head Lady. So this is someone else. This is another reconstruction of her. She's said to have been found around Sussex. Again, mixed heritage. We don't know exactly much about her. She's said to have she died when she was quite young, between 22 and 25 years old. Okay, but she's another example of diversity, women of colour in the UK, person of colour in the UK, way before the time that we're told constantly. The Aurelian Moors. The Aurelian Moors was a group of Moors who were soldiers. They were brought over from the Roman Empire to the UK to man the Hadrian's Wall. Who knows what Hadrian's Wall is? Yeah, I've never been. Have you been? Nice? Worth going?
There's bits of it that are still there, some of it and lots not. Yeah, but
It's worth going, isn't it?
historical.
Guys, recommendation here, Hadrian's Wall, yeah? No, I'm probably going to go myself as well. But yeah, they were a group of Moors, group of people, of African men, brought over to the UK to man Hadrian's Wall. They said to have settled in a Cumbrian village called Burgh by Sands and had a community there. Had brought their wives over, had children, and integrated in the British society at the time, the English society at the time. There were officers, soldiers, generals, etc. So again, this idea that we have about the presence of black people in the UK being some type of slavery, servile servitude kind of starts going out the window when we know about these things. But it's whether we know or not. That issue. So, let's start looking at some other topics, some other aspects. So, Peter Fryer, in his book, Stay in Power, he talks about black people coming from other places to the UK. He talks about black people coming from North Africa, they came with the Celts, or the Celtic people, in 800 BC, so 800 years before Jesus Christ was born. He talks about black people coming here. He talks about black people coming with the Vandals from North Africa, another group of people or ethnic group from Europe in 450 BC, so 450 years before Jesus was born. And he talks about black people coming with the Vikings and Danish raiders from 700, yes, the year 700. So 700 years after Jesus died. And we know more about the Vikings and the Danes because there's a Viking grave site in York, again, York. And when we've done some excavation of this Danish site and done a DNA analysis of the bones, some of the remains that were found were from people of African descent. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, if we start looking at the medieval and early modern period, which started from about 1066 to 1603. 1066, who remembers 1066? What happened in 1066? Yes, well done. This is my new group over here in the middle. That's the new group now. But is everyone okay? I hope it's not too heavy. Yeah, is it making sense? Yeah? And it's important that we know this stuff, isn't it? Yeah, okay. If I am moving at too much of a fast pace or I'm losing you all, just put your hand up, okay? And we'll go back and take it a bit slower, okay? All right. So, we know about someone called Ipswich Man. The Ipswich Man was found in a Christian cemetery or the grounds of a Christian monastery at Ipswich. He's born sometime between 1190 and 1300. This is his face. This is what they say that he looked like. Again, from this North Africa region. And he's said to have been found with a number of other skeletons who they've traced come from sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, Ipswich Man. Interesting. We know more about the black presence in Tudor England than probably the black presence in any other period of history before this period. And the reason why we know is that during this period of time, record keeping became really efficient and proficient. Record keeping was really, doing really, really well. We have birth records, baptism records, we have marriage records, and we start having things like death records, birth records, and marriage records. Of the marriage records that we have, and the records that we have, we know that there were a large presence of black people in London. Anyone from London here? Yeah. London in the house. London in the house. Okay, so we know that there was a large presence of black people in London, places around Stepney, Southwark, Cheapside, Aldgate. But actually, the second largest place was Plymouth. Yeah, I know. I've done some research at the University of Plymouth. We're looking at some birth records and death records, etc. Really interesting stuff. The third place was Bristol. The third place was Bristol. And then we have other places. There are places on this list that I've never heard about before. Never heard of. Has anyone heard of Blean before? No? Holt? Yeah? And we see Nottingham somewhere down there, don't we? Yay! Nottingham on the list, Nottingham in the house. Round of applause for Nottingham. Yeah! Alright. So we see these areas are the areas that, and we've got a place called Powys, which is in Cardiff. But we see these places are the places that had the tradition, the historic presence of black people in the UK. Not the areas that we would think of now, like Manchester and Birmingham and Liverpool. Not these places. These are the places. Okay? David Deberdine, in his Oxford Companion to British Black History, he says that the population of black people in the UK at this time was between 15 to 20,000 in 1601. I mentioned earlier that there's always a royal rumble between historians. So some historians actually criticize his figures and say that it was less. Some say it was about 5 to 10,000. It doesn't matter. The number here is not important. What is important is that Africans in 1601 they had a substantial presence in the UK, not as slaves or as servants, but as free people. Okay? I think that's what's important, rather than the actual number. Yeah? So, in terms of some of the people that we know of, and this image is taken from the National Portrait Gallery in London. It's an image called The Adoration of the Magi, which essentially is the three wise men going to give Jesus the, you know about it, I see you shaking your head, you know about it. Yeah. So it's about three wise men going to give Jesus his frankincense and myrrh, etc., etc., etc. In these images, Adoration of the Magi, it's a concept, right? But we have a number of artists throughout Europe that paint, that give their own depiction of that happening. There is always a king of African descent in these images, always, across the whole of European Renaissance paintings. Okay? Always. So, iconography is very important because some of the pictures or the images that we see are people of African descent in a servant or slavery type nature in the portraits. But these images give us a very, very, very different context. Okay? So these are some of the people that we know of. We know about a person called John Jacques Francis. He was a salvage diver, and he was hired to salvage a ship. It's called the Mary Rose in 1546. And he didn't have any equipment, but he was known to be from West Africa, a place called in modern day Liberia. And he was brought over to salvage all the relics and things from this particular ship. He was also the first black person to give evidence in an English court. Okay? Very important, very substantial and important person. Based on the theme for this year, it's called Saluting Our Sisters, isn't it? Yeah. And it's very cold in here, I know. Very cold. Richard, is there some heating or?
I have asked and said it's on.
Okay. Guys, we're in England, remember, okay? Yeah, we're in England. Alright, so Catalina the Cardons. She was a woman, and she was in, we don't have an image of her unfortunately, but she's supposedly Catherine of Aragon's friend. Catherine of Aragon is King Henry VIII's wife. She's supposedly one of her friends, and her bedmaker, her chambermaid, part of her court, part of her entourage. Yeah? She's said to have arrived in Plymouth with Catherine of Aragon, and Catherine of Aragon's court, her entourage, has said to have been very, very diverse, made up of very, very diverse people. Catherine de Cons supposedly came with her husband and settled in the UK. Okay? We also have someone called Catalina of Gloucestershire. Not part of any royal family, not part of any court. Yeah? But she was supposedly unmarried and living in Almondsbury in Gloucestershire. God knows where that is. But Almondsbury in Gloucestershire. She owned a valuable cow, right? Yeah? This is important. No, this is important. In the 16th century, to be an unmarried woman of colour, and to have a cow which provided her with an income from selling milk and butter and these products, and we don't know her ever to have been married or get married, etc., etc., etc. We don't know why, but we know that she was an independent woman, making her own money. Yeah? Beyonce would have loved her. You know? All my single ladies. You know, this was her, right? So this is very substantial. A woman in this particular period. Not having to rely on a man or find her wealth or mobility through a man, etc. So I'd like everyone to salute Catalina of Gloucestershire. Salute. I haven't got my watch on or my phone, so just checking time. 10 minutes? 15? Right. So guys, I told you we're going to struggle to get through all of that. But has it been informative? Yeah? Okay. We're going to go on for another 5 minutes and then maybe open the floor to questions, okay? Can someone be my time checker for 5 minutes, please? Yeah? You got me? Alright. So John Blank. John Blank was King Henry VIII's royal trumpeter. This is an extract, a wonderful tapestry, that was an extract from the 1511 Westminster Tournament Roll. The 1511 Westminster Tournament Roll was a massive spectacle in Westminster at the time. Think about, has anyone been to Carnival before? Yeah? Carnival, Notting Hill Carnival, Trinidad Carnival, yeah? Any type of carnival or street possession, think about that, but times a million, right? Very, very important. And this is John Black, who was his chief, King Henry VIII's chief trumpeter, his lead trumpeter. He's pictured here with a green and golden turban on his head, which iconography of people of African descent in this particular period of time, they usually have turbans, which denote their otherness usually from a religious perspective. They're usually not Christian. That's why I have the turban on their head. He was paid 8 shillings per day, very, very good wage at that particular time. His annual wage was twice that of a farm labourer and 3 times that of a servant. We know that he increased his wage from 8 shillings or 8 pounds, 8 shillings per day to 16. You know, he went to King Henry VIII, wrote him a letter and said, I want more money. King Henry VIII said, okay. Very significant. You've gone to a king. How many of us can go to our king and say, I want more money? Can't do it. Wish I could. But we can't. But he was able to. Which shows the diversity, which shows the social mobility, which shows his authority and power and influence in between 1501 and 1511. Black people or people of colour in the UK being in positions of authority and power is not something new. Yeah, we were speaking about it earlier, black women being in positions of power. It's not something new, it's just that we don't know about it. And so much of the achievements have been overcasted by slavery and overcasted by negative things. Right? We know that he was married and he was gifted a wedding gift by King Henry VIII. So I'd like to salute John Blank, a very important person. And with that said, I think we've got a few more minutes. And I'm just going to talk about this before we open up to questions, okay? In 1596, Queen Elizabeth I, she made 3 royal proclamations. And there were letters to her Lord Mayor of London and a number of her other officials. And she basically said that there are a number of blackamoors in this realm. of which there are already too many. And she ordered that they be deported from the country. This is online, you can find this online. Okay, just type in Queen Elizabeth's proclamation, 1596. She then rewrote this proclamation a week later with urgency. Maybe someone didn't respond to the email. You know when you send an email to someone, they don't respond, so you got to send the chase up. That's what she done a week later. And then again a couple years later, so they still hadn't responded. She then sent them another chaser in 1601, saying the same thing. Okay? This time, her language was a lot more explicit. She said there was a great number of niggers and blackamoors. This term niggers, we start seeing it become a lot more popular during this particular time due to the influence of the Spanish. But she still used the word blackamoors. She said they've crept into the realm, and she said that they're infidels, they don't have an understanding of Christ and his gospel, and that they're too much of them. So there must have been enough people of colour, black people, in the UK at that time for our Queen, Elizabeth II, to write 3 letters about it. Contrary to what we know, contrary to what we're told. Okay, so with that, on that note, I'm gonna close. I'm gonna hand over the mic to Richard. Hopefully you're gonna give me some questions, hopefully not too hard, because yeah, all good. But yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Do we have any questions off the back of what you've learned so far? Any takers for a first question? Oh, got some hands. So I've got 2. I will come to you. I'll come to you. So I'll come to you first.
Thank you very much. So my question is around what role or what impact do you think our history and all these things you talked about in terms of how we were treated and all that, what impact do you think that has on us in how we show up as leaders or in spaces?
So it's a great question. I knew I was going to get a question like this, to be honest, but I still didn't prepare for it. So how does this history help us to show up and become good leaders? Well, it's about representation, isn't it? I think that's one of the main types of issues that we have. I think there's also this aspect of imposter syndrome that permeates a lot of what we do. Because we don't have we don't see representation in positions of real power, we have an issue with thinking that we can then be that person ourselves. Because of so much of what was taught to us about history is through the lens of slavery, is through a lens of subjugation, oppression, resistance. We have a perception that our history starts there. We're not taught about anything pre-slavery or pre-colonial. So when you subject a particular group to a level of history that is so reductionist and short in its origin, you make them feel like their history started at that subjugation. So they've never achieved anything else. So if there's no examples of achievement from before this period of great stature, how do you then replicate it and achieve it again? So this history is about really highlighting the presence of and leadership of black people in this country, in the UK, so that we may be able to see role models and leaders in history and understand the fact that we didn't just come here in 1948 in great numbers. We've been here, we've been a part of the UK, we're entitled to feel a part of the UK, and we belong here, and we also have an identity that's reflective of here. So that's what I think it mainly shows.
We have another question. We've got a book. You still want to? Yeah. Can you shout?
Yes. So it was about. It's
So that could just have been a typo from my side. Yeah. It could have just have been a typo from my side. Also, places change. Are you familiar with, who's familiar with a place in London called Brixton? You know about Brixton, yeah? Know about Brixton. Brixton has changed. Brixton used to be a place that was not stronghold, but that had a place that had a high African Caribbean, particularly Caribbean population. It still does, but not in the numbers that it has. Why? Because the people have moved out and dispersed. Yeah? The presence of and the significance of black people in York was during the Roman period. Okay? Almost 1,000 years before we see the presence of black people in the Tudor period. So as we have migration, we have displacement, people move around, etc., 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 that could have been one of the reasons why York in the Tudor period wasn't one of the strongholds of black people. It didn't have as much of a large black community as it did in the Roman period.
So you have a question?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, thank you for your talk. It's so fascinating, and the research and knowledge you've got is fantastic. What's your understanding of what's being done? Because obviously this sort of information, or these narratives and stories of famous, or not in historical terms, black people that have led and we hear so many about. How do you get that into schools or young minds now? Is there stuff going on, whether it's nationally, or is it down to individuals like yourself championing that?
Yeah, so thank you for your... Hello? Yeah, thanks for your feedback, really appreciate it. In terms of national curriculum, I think things are changing, things have changed since maybe we went to school. I don't think I think one of my colleagues mentioned the snail's pace. I think a snail's pace. I think it's happening at a snail's pace though. I think more should be done and more needs to be done. And I think it comes down to organisations like myself. There are other organisations that try to champion Black history being a part of the national curriculum, not just in Black History Month, but throughout the year. Yeah. So yeah, not much is being done. It's improved, but nominally, but a lot more needs to be done. Yeah, a lot more needs to be done because it's important. And I think if I knew this stuff when I was a kid, maybe and I've done well at school. Yeah, but maybe I would have done better at school. I remember when I was in school and there was a school, not a private school.